Ole Miss had its first scrimmage of the year over the weekend. We reacted to it. Now we're going to tell you 5 things that you can take away from it. This is the Locked On Ole Miss podcast.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks again for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Hello, I'm Stephen Willis, and this is the Locked On Ole Miss podcast. And this show is brought to you today by LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs can help you find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. The scrimmage this weekend was taken over essentially by the defense. The defense was the storyline winner that you can go over. And these are probably the 5 storylines and takeaways that we can come out of this scrimmage. First of all, defense is way ahead of 2022. The defense, which had high hopes going into 2022, I know we have hindsight of what that defense became. This defense is ahead of where this expectation was going into the season. It's one of those things where schematically it just kind of is a marriage that works. And maybe the transfer players that have been brought in by Pete Golden for this defense is kind of hitting at the moment. So we'll see what's going on. The defensive line's looking very good. The defensive backfield, I have not heard anything real negative about that. We had some stuff come out about the linebackers and the whole situation with Kari Coleman, how that might end up, I do not know. But Suntarine Perkins taking reps, meaningful reps. Jeremiah Jean-Baptiste, Ashanti Seastrunk, Monty Montgomery, Ladarius Tennyson when he gets healthy. The linebacker position, there's bodies that can play there. Not just bodies, very, very good football players. So I like what this defense is doing and the way it looks early on into this camp. And a lot has to do with the way they attack and the way they play. Now, one thing Pete Golding talked about when he was interviewed was how this defense kind of does what's needed to win ball games. It's going to be a hyper-aggressive game, and it kind of matches what he was at UTSA. I don't necessarily watch too much Bama film about Pete Golding, other than trying to look for some schemes that might be brought over. As far as the way he's going to coach defense and the way he wants them to play, I think that UTSA defense will be a nice indicator of what he wants to do. Extremely aggressive, and we heard that over the weekend. The one thing that's popping out is that our second thing is defensive end is a strength. Apparently, Cedric Johnson and Jared Ivey both had a day. Now, was that Jalen Williams? Was that Micah Pettis? I do not know. I do know that these are 2 good football players. And then you have Isaac Ukwu, and Ole Miss has a nice strength developing at defensive end. And that is something that we should all be thankful for, because on 3rd and 6 and longer, the defense has a chance to look like those Alabama defenses have looked in 3rd and long, where whenever you play most teams, you have 2 seconds worth of pass pro to get rid of the football. Against Alabama, it's 1.5 or less. Maybe this defense can speed that clock up, speed up decisions, force turnovers. We'll see exactly what happens with that. It's honestly a really good situation for Ole Miss football. And if you notice, number 1 and number 2, they're both defensive stories. And I think number 3 is a defensive story as well, because the front 7 for Ole Miss's defense is going to be the strength of the defense. Now, you have players back in the back, and I want to see a little bit longer in spring and fall camp to develop chemistry and cohesion in that back 7. But the front 7's kind of where you want them to be. And that's, we talk about Cedric Johnson and Jared Ivey and Isaac Ukwu. And then you have inside, you have J.J. Pegues and Stephon Wynn. I think Jamon Gordon is playing out at defensive end as well. You have Joshua Harris. You have Xavion Harris. You have bodies everywhere that have played the position pretty consistently and played it pretty well. We have a lot of players on defense that have played FBS football, not just so-so football, FBS football. Like Stephon Wynn is from Nebraska. Isaac Ukwu is not used to punching above his weight. He played at James Madison. Akello Stone, who you don't hear much about on the defensive line, came from Georgia Tech. Jared Ivey, Georgia Tech. J.J. Pegues, Auburn. There's some dudes that were recruited. And that defensive line in the trenches, I'm not saying they're championship ready, okay? Do not hear that. I'm saying this team is getting to the point talent-wise to where in the traditions they can compete. And it's not just an upset that they got something done. It's because they have real players that they can count on as well. Now, that's all fine and good, dandy, right? They still have to execute, but the talent is there. And this weekend showed that the defense was ahead of schedule. There's been one real hiccup that has happened, and that has come from the Corey Coleman situation, and we don't want to get in on rumors on that. But the one thing that we can take from that and what has gone on, the other things people have freaked out about in camp, is one, you're suspended from all team activities. And the others, you might get demoted to second team. So it's layers. So everything does not deserve the same level of freak out, essentially, as you might expect. Anyway, the third thing that we have to look forward to is Suntarine Perkins is going to play a lot. I asked Michael Katz on the show on Saturday, and he raved about him. He said that while they rotate so much, it's kind of hard to get an idea of what a starting defensive unit looks like of the 11 out there. Suntarine Perkins got meaningful reps. That's all you can say. They're rotating so much at about 10 days in, I guess we are at this point. So he's going to play a bunch. And we have two more scrimmages and a mock game, although that mock game is not much of an issue that you can take from that, because it's basically all about operation and making sure your system is set up correctly for substitutions and things like that to make sure operationally everything goes smooth. But he has two real scrimmages to make a push. I think Monty Montgomery is going to secure one of those starting linebacker spots. That is my prediction. Now, who plays beside him depends on who can pick up the defense a lot and whether or not Monty Montgomery can be a quarterback a little bit on the field at the same time. Because Suntarine Perkins is going to play as much as Perkins can handle. It's not going to be in a situation where you want to overdo him, but if whatever he can do, whatever he can handle, he's going to be on the field for, because we talked about when we were down at the Under Armour All-American game, he was one of the better people on the field. I think he was the best player on the field. In fact, until he got to Ole Miss, I don't think he's ever stepped on a football field where he wasn't the best player on it. And I'm going to be real honest about something else. I'm not 100% sure he isn't now. He just might not be mentally there at this point, but athletically and physically and all of those tools, he has the ability to do just that. He's a really, really good football player, and everybody should be really, really fired up about that. Brad Logan on the tweet says, Pete Golding said, I recruiting at the other place, and that means Alabama, and I had him ranked as the top linebacker in the country. He's extremely explosive, fast, and his closing speed is really good. He loves football. That's Pete Golding on Suntarine Perkins. So that is pretty good. We got two more takeaways that we can take away from Saturday's scrimmage coming up after the break. It's going to be pretty exciting about that. We're going to move to the offensive side of the ball. We're not just going to stick on the defensive side of the ball, although it's defense 1, offense nothing at this point. But if you get to the point, this offense was top 10 in the country and they returned to everybody. They're going to be fine. But it's really cool that the defense competed up to the level to where they can do that. Now, we did talk to Michael Katz, And then the next scrimmage is like, do you want the offense to win? It's like, I think we want a battle, just a battle. We don't want the defense to slip down too much because we want some consistency to develop. So we want the offense to slowly get where they need to get. And if that happens, they will be all right. Anyway, we'll talk about that in the next segment. Right now, I do want to tell you that today's show is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a small wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. And that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. It's insanely easy to create a job posting on LinkedIn. We all know how to create a profile. We've created profiles on all sorts of social media. There's social medias that are popping up seemingly every day at this point. And you just do that. You just create a profile that way. But this is where it's a little bit different, okay? Then you can add your purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile, and you can spread the word that you are, in fact, hiring. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. Adding the right team member can have a positive and measurable impact on your business. You can be more successful if you hire the right people. Just like if you hire the wrong people, it's going to slow you down. It's going to stunt your growth. But the right person can help you get to where you need to be. Heck, ask Tegna about me, honestly. It's why small businesses rank LinkedIn Jobs number one in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. All right, so we spent the first segment talking about the defensive takeaways from the first scrimmage, and the first scrimmage was won by the defense. There was no touchdown passes thrown. Jaxson Dart had a day, but no touchdown passes were thrown. We'll talk about that in just a second. Heck, let's talk about it right now, honestly. The number 4 takeaway is Jaxson Dart appears to be QB1. He's like, wait, Steven, you just said that no quarterbacks threw a touchdown pass in the scrimmage. That's exactly what I said. That's what I meant. But if you look at the way it was substituted and the way they did it, it was very NFL preseason game like, and this is preseason game 1. And Jaxson Dart only played a couple of series. He ended up like 7 of 9 or so, somewhere around 90 yards. Everybody kept their own stats, so we don't know exactly what he got, but he was in that ballpark. An interception and no touchdown. The interception was down towards the end zone. David Johnson from 247 Sports, the Red and Blue Crew podcast, said that Trey Washington actually picked him off near the goal line. Now, we mentioned that Lane Kiffin abhors turnovers. He hates them. It's something that drives him absolutely bonkers. It's one of those things. It just is. Now, Spencer Sanders ended up similar boat. He was 9 for 16-ish, 140 yards and a pick, no touchdowns. And then the young guys were young guys. It was their first scrimmage of the fall. First time to get their feet wet doing that. I'm not going to put too much stock in their numbers. But the two people that are competing for the job were those two, and they had a remarkably similar day. And the difference is Jaxson Dart, if he was 7 of 9, if that's indeed the correct number, I think that was from Chuck Roundsville and David Johnson, said 7 of 9. That's still really efficient. That's over 10 yards per completion. If he threw for 90 something yards, that interception needs to be cleaned up, but this spring we've done pretty well. So I think that will actually happen. And Jaxson Dart appears to be, through the actions of the school, not from the words, from the actions, they're preparing him like he's a QB1. They're playing him first. They're pulling him out first. They're putting him all over social media. He's kind of becoming the face of their program. They're intentionally trying to put other quarterbacks on the social media and things like that. But how much can you take away from that whenever every day something like this happens? Really interesting indeed. Now, number 5 and the last takeaway from the scrimmage, the offensive line is going to be fine. Nobody worry about that. This is a unit that returns 4 out of 5 players. The 5th player is being competed by somebody who did start some last year and was somebody that was all conference in the Pac-12. The offensive line is going to be fine. This is a team that run blocks 95% of the time, okay? And until you know exactly what that means and how that is going to be handled, you can't really judge this offensive line. When you run block, it is easier to shed it if the quarterback holds the ball too long. And this offense does like some third-level RPOs. And when I say third-level RPOs, that means you are throwing a pass off of a secondary player. And you're reading what he does to determine where the ball goes. It takes time for the receiver to get down there to force a reaction. It's going to take a little bit of time as well. The offensive line is run blocking, either inside zone or outside zone. The whole goal is, so if it's a run play, they're blocking it the way they need to block it. And within the rules, technique-wise, that is the way it's handled. It is the reason that sometimes when it's 3rd and 15 and the RPO is taken out, the offense can look a little bit clunky. It's the reason why whenever it is not operating at full potential, it can look clunky. You need the jet sweeps. You need the deep balls. You need all of the stuff, because when it's working in concert, the offense as a total being is good. But if you start taking those away, okay, all of a sudden you're not torturing linebackers. They know exactly, and they're paying attention to number 4. And Mississippi State has 15 tackles for loss, and Texas Tech is living in your backfield. All because the jet sweeps are not working right. You're not running at full tempo. You're not doing the things that make this offense dynamic. So whenever it gets to full strength and they're doing things the way that it needs to be done, and it has been done at Ole Miss over the last 3 years, they will be all right. This is an offense that was in the top 10 in the country, the number 3 rushing offense in college football. This offensive line is going to be fine. Now, pass protection, everybody is going to point to pass protection. But like I said, when you're run blocking every time and the quarterback holds the ball, things like that, some things are not entirely the offensive lineman's fault. It isn't a situation where you're going back to catch people. It's where you're going out to actually strike somebody and to create lanes running the football. And we're really good at doing that. And with a technician like John Garrison coming in, as opposed to Thornton, it's going to get a little bit better. John Garrison is from the Nebraska tree. And for those who do not know, like half of my family are Nebraska fans. They're from Omaha. And they moved down to Mississippi in the Air Force, and that's how that family came together. So I do keep an eye on John Garrison and the Nebraska offensive line scheme, because you can imagine the 90s were a nightmare for me. All I heard during the 90s is if Nebraska ever played Ole Miss, you know it would be horrible what happened. And then Nebraska played Ole Miss. Ole Miss beat them, and I have not heard Heidi or hair from anybody. But defense won the scrimmage. Jaxson Dart appears to be QB1. Offensive line is going to be fine. Suntarine Perkins is going to play meaningful snaps, and a lot of them this year. And defensive ends is going to be a strength. That should be the 5 takeaways that you look at. When we come back, we are going to do viewer mail. It's turning into one of our more popular segments, viewer mail. And we're getting questions. And one of the questions that we're asked is, which game should we put on the calendar and just make a mental note that are game day candidates? And we'll talk about that when we come back. So stick around. Thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. For your second listen, check out Locked On SEC with Chris Gordy. He talks all about SEC football from all 12, 14, 16 teams in the league. However they go up and down, but he covers them all. Now, I'm pretty sure he even talks about Texas and Oklahoma at this point. That's the reason I say 16. So he does a fantastic job. Check him out on the Locked On Podcast Network. That's Locked On SEC. Everydayers, we're going to try and get like John Macon Gillespie. We're going to have our regulars as we're going towards scrimmage number 2. So stick around for that. We're really fired up about what can become from this channel. We spent most of last week ranked in the top 200 of iTunes charts on football, which, to my knowledge, no Ole Miss show has ever done. To my knowledge, that is just a fantastic accomplishment, as our audio side has really picked up growing, and we appreciate that. Most of the stuff we do video-wise is on here. It's really cool to know that we have an audio side as well that are listening to the podcast channels all over the internet to listen to the show. We broke a record Friday of podcast listeners, and I think we've done it like 3 times in the last 2 weeks. Really, really cool stuff. And it also helps that we're starting fall camp and you guys are really, really interested in what's going on. But thank you very much for everything that's going on. Also, if you want to watch it, the YouTube channel is on there. We have graphics, we have highlights, we have video from time to time. And I'm pretty impressed with it. The Friday show is probably at 3,500 views by now. So thank you for all of that. And of course, join our Discord server. I'll put that up right now. It works real similarly to a message board, but it's a chat room. It's like a message board chat room hybrid because it's a chat that you can thread. So you can keep topics on conversations depending on what you do. It's kind of intimidating when you go in there for the first time, but when you do and get the hang of it, you won't want to do anything else. It's unbelievably easy. Keeps you informed of all the comings and goings in Ole Miss athletics, and we also have a good time. My rule is I'm not going to allow trolling. If you think that you want to do that, try it the first time. There's 0 tolerance. You don't get warnings. You don't get to say mea culpa, none of that stuff, because the main purpose of this thing is for people to have fun talking Ole Miss sports. If you don't want to do that, this probably isn't the place for you. But our Discord links down in the description. And if it is expired, because it does expire from time to time, let me know via DM. I will get you an invite, as open enrollment is open for about 2 more weeks as we get ready for the Mercer game. So I'm pretty fired up about that. So we talked in the show about the 5 takeaways that we can take away from Saturday's scrimmage and went over certain things. Now, we had some viewer mail questions and we wanted to get to some viewer mail. Real quick, Will.I.am asked Stephen Willis, what is the most likely scenario for Ole Miss to be featured in a college game day this year? If they beat Bama, do you think game day will come to Oxford for LSU? That is the easiest. I think there's 3 games that Ole Miss needs to circle as possible game day type things. Now, some of these things are not all in Ole Miss's control, obviously, but there's 3 games that I think Ole Miss should circle, and it all depends on how Ole Miss does and how the opponent does. The first one is, in fact, that LSU game. If Ole Miss were to go over to Alabama and beat Alabama, and LSU is, heck, LSU could probably be 1 loss and lose the Florida State game. That Ole Miss LSU game has a chance to be a game day game. Yeah, that one is absolutely a home run. The second one, if Auburn wins football games, if Auburn is 5-2 or whatever it is going into that game, there's a chance that Ole Miss and Auburn could end up being that game, one of those games, because of the storylines with Hugh Freeze and Ole Miss and all of that back and forth. I'm telling you, that's going to be a weird night, weird game, period. Just get ready for it. Go ahead and get your minds right, because that is how that is. It's going to be completely off the rails. And the third one would be the Ole Miss or Georgia game. If Ole Miss can somehow make it through Alabama, LSU, and get that weird game, and Auburn, you have a chance to be 8-1 going to Athens. And if you're 8-1 going to Athens, they're probably going to put game day up there as well. Those are the 3 games that are the most likely for game day this season, in my opinion. Now, if you have any ideas elsewhere, put it down in the description or in the comments. Let me know exactly which games you think Ole Miss has the best shot to get in game day for, and which games we should pay attention to that maybe I'm not thinking of. So get down in the description or comments and let me know exactly what's going on there. All right. Rebel Man 22 says, the big question is, how does the D look using the new scheme? And if you watch the first segment of today's podcast, you can know we are incredibly fired up about the defense. This defense is ahead of schedule. It just is. I want to see some consistency develop of the defense going into the second scrimmage. And the second scrimmage is probably the big scrimmage, because after that, they're probably going to taper off just a little bit so that the legs are completely there before Mercer, before Tulane, and it's 877,000 degrees. Remember, if you go to the Tulane game, if it has alcohol in it, you are not hydrating. Drink plenty of water. So I think the defense looks good. The transfers seem to be meshing pretty well. It was really cool to listen to the interview by Pete Golding the other day when he said a lot of the stuff and echoed a lot of the stuff that I've been saying here for months. System is everything. It's a difference between a zone defense, defensive back, and a man-to-man defense, defensive back. They're all football players. They're all good ones, but people like Jaxson Johnson and Davidson Igmanosin might not be fundamentally set up to play cornerback in this scheme. Remember, there's no such thing as a good football player. There's only a football player that's good at doing this, blank, whatever it is. Like I said, there's no such thing as a 5-star quarterback. There might be a 5-star pocket passer, 5-star dual threat, 5-star running quarterback. But there's not just a 5-star quarterback. It's too broad. Running back, same thing. You could honestly have 70 or 80 categories offensively of what a 5-star player looks like. And the sooner you realize that, the sooner you'll be better prepared to deal with everything. And all of a sudden, recruiting doesn't feel like a us versus them type proposition. And you realize there's a lot more players that can do pretty much the same thing in the portal, in recruiting, heck, in Canada. Pretty fired up. Anyway, I think Trevor Jaxson is getting set to commit this weekend. In 2 weeks, Noreel White is set to commit. I'm not saying to Ole Miss. I'm just saying they're set to announce their decision. And we'll see exactly how they do. We'll talk to Brian Smith. I think we'll have him Saturday. We'll record that probably Thursday or Friday. So it might be before the Trevor Jaxson commitment. We don't know. And same thing will happen with Noreel White. We're going to keep an eye on both of those. I think both of those are good players that they'd be honestly foolish to go elsewhere, because Lane Kiffin could take a player like Noreel White and put them in the NFL. And if you want proof that he can't do that, or he can do that, look at Elijah Moore right now. Quarterbacks, same thing. Trevor Jaxson is built in a lab for this offense. Should be fine. Anyway, thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. For your second listen, check out Locked On SEC. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Every dayers, we're going to try and get John Macon Gillespie. You'll have Pratt. You'll have Tom Vanderford. We're going to try and get Derek Vandegrift this week. And we might see if there's some other interviews that might come up. Brian Smith as well. So stick around for that. Look forward to that and these extras. And, of course, the Locked On Ole Miss podcast. That's why you're here, right? Anyway, this is so much fun. I am so lucky to get to do this. Thank you so much. Anyway, hotty toddy.